Hi Bother Brigade, here's what's bothering me today. Because of that massive storm which I told y'all about that basically took out the ability to make videos for just over a week, along with numerous other real life things, meant that this is way more delayed than it has any right being. Finally, after, many problems, welcome to the Good News from May video, even though it's mid-June by this point. But I want to stress here that even though May was very much a doozy in several respects, there were some rather amazing, if I'm being honest, wins at home and abroad for, progress and leftist causes in general. So, first off, on May 4th, we had the news that the Irish Nationalist Party, Sinn Féin, may be headed for a historic victory in Northern Ireland, which has been led by British Unionist Party since it was founded as a state a century ago. This is basically something that is not supposed to happen. There was even a video clip. I tried to find it, but wasn't able to do it with the time crunch that I had. But there was a video clip of someone in Britain basically pointing out, this is fascinating, but it should really be impossible for them to win. Because again, it was Northern Ireland. It was designed to be part of the UK and separate from the rest of the island of Ireland and also from the Republic of Ireland. So the fact that Sinn Féin managed to win the greatest vote share is very much astounding, considering the system was basically built to make sure that they never managed to pull that off. So that speaks to just how absolutely bonkers the situation over in Ireland is right now, mostly due to Brexit, but it's also just about how people can just become so tired of establishment parties and eventually say, you know what? Voting for this for a century or so hasn't really been working out. Let's change the ball game a little bit. And well, here we are with Sinn Féin getting first choice at First Minister. So things are going to be very interesting in Ireland for a while. However, that wasn't the only amazing left-wing news story that came out on May 4th. France elections. Left forms coalition to fight Macron. 4 left-wing parties in France have agreed in principle to form an alliance to challenge President Emmanuel Macron at June's parliamentary elections. The Socialists, Greens, Communists, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon's far-left France Unbowed party reached a draft agreement after all-night negotiations. Mr. Mélenchon, who just failed to make the presidential runoff in April, is looking for a majority of MPs. All the parties involved hailed the agreement as historic. So people might remember that a little while ago, Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party just barely missed being able to advance into the second round, which is why it unfortunately became a runoff between Emmanuel Macron's centrist party and Marine Le Pen's far-right party. However, in the immediate aftermath of that, it's like, okay, look, we've chosen the president. Okay, now it's time to actually choose the government and the prime minister, because that's how France's system works. So with that in mind, they have decided to create this coalition to try and target 50% of seats. And they've apparently been working towards that. And so when the elections just recently happened, again, sorry, it's mid-June by this point, but Macron and leftist alliance finished neck and neck in first round. So it's kind of unclear if any side, especially Macron's side, will win a majority, but it's a good thing to see that they have actually formed a broad strokes leftist coalition to fight back against this, and they are making a serious challenge to Macron's power, which I think we can all agree as leftists and progressives here is a very good thing, actually. So yeah, right there, both in Ireland and in France, we have some really positive left-wing political developments. And then on May 9th, Canada basically got a bit of a shaming from the UN. UN committee condemns Canada over alleged human rights violations. Yeah, turns out Canada basically got shamed by a UN agency for our treatment, both the government of Canada's treatment and also the government of British Columbia's treatment of Indigenous land defenders. Basically, the UN said, this is objectively terrible. What are you doing? We're deeply ashamed and disappointed in you. And that's not really much of an exaggeration. The letter is pretty damning. The letter singles out governments in Canada and British Columbia, saying they have escalated their use of force, surveillance, and criminalization of land defenders and peaceful protesters to intimidate, remove, and forcibly evict Secwepemc and Wet'suwet'en nations from their traditional lands, in particular by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, the Community Industry Response Group, CIRG, and private security firms. Which, I mean, for those of us who've been paying attention, yeah, we kind of knew that our governments were being absolutely terrible. So the whole, we believe in reconciliation action and in good, solid climate change action. Anyone who's been paying attention knows that that's a farce, but it's good to see other people call out our government on its BS. So it's not really often that I thank or celebrate the UN in any real capacity, but I very much appreciate that they basically gave a dressing down and called out our government on its rather unforgivable BS towards indigenous land defenders. And right next door in the United States, on May 10th, the world found out that Microsoft would offer to help cover US employees' travel costs for abortion. So, like, I know this is kind of a bittersweet thing given the whole terrible Roe v. Wade and abortion debate in America, which is basically just dystopian as all hell. But that being said, we have seen in response to that various companies and also like even the US Air Force, see my previous video about that, offering to, hey, if you need an abortion and you're a member of our service or our company, we will provide at no cost to you transportation to somewhere that will actually perform an abortion, which I mean is good given the circumstances, but it's ridiculous that these circumstances exist. You feel me? But hey, we are here for some actual good news, and that was kind of more like bittersweet news. In more actual, like really good news, a quiet victory. Janitors in Baltimore fought hard, won a union. Their employer, a subsidiary of LifeBridge Health, refused to recognize the union / bargain a contract, arguing the workers are, quote, disabled, end quote. This has gone all the way up to the Fourth Circuit, who upheld their union rights. So I will provide a link to that below because it's more of a thread. This is just the first part of that thread. It goes into a little more detail, especially about the use of the quote disabled part, which was again really ridiculous on the company's part. But basically what these janitors realized was, you know, they weren't necessarily underpaid, but they realized they could get a much better deal and better pay and also better benefits and like a proper agreement when they actually formed a union, and they went ahead and they did that. So yes, the company fought back against them. They took it to the court, and the court said, yeah, no, these people absolutely have the right to unionize. So again, positive union win. And again, there's been more like Starbucks union wins. There's like talks of, you know, other places and like several co-ops actually unionizing now. So there are definite, you know, real progressive union wins happening now throughout 2022 so far, and I absolutely love to see it. And when people aren't getting a fair shake, they're also going on strike, like what happened recently here in Ontario. Strike by Ontario construction workers for wage increases expands to include 43,000 workers. Yeah, so before the most recent election, and I know a lot of people are disappointed by that, but basically nothing got done, and I'm pretty sure continues to not be done in Ontario because the construction workers, thousands of them, I'm pretty sure even like some people have said that depending on how you count it, it's now like over 100,000, but do not quote me on that. The official figure right now is, last I checked, this 43,000 one. It might have gone up to over 50,000. Basically, a lot of construction workers, when their contracts ended and they were trying to bargain again, they decided, oh, you know what? The renegotiation ended on April 30th and you're kind of dicking us about. So that's it. We're going on strike. Have fun, you know, making money if we aren't actually building all this skyscrapers that we can't afford to live in, right? So the result has been a bunch of semi-finished buildings all over the province not getting done because they recognize the value of their labor and they're withholding it, which again, I love to see. So that was happening on May 12th, and then just 2 days later on May 14th, we got some really positive news about a union at a Trader Joe's in Massachusetts. Exclusive, Trader Joe's workers in Massachusetts are organizing to form the company's first ever union. They say Trader Joe's has repeatedly slashed pay and benefits and neglected safety issues in recent years. They're unionizing to make the company live up to its own values. Yeah, apparently Trader Joe's supposedly has the whole like, oh yeah, we're like a family here. That's usually a red flag, by the way. And, you know, we believe in, you know, treating our workers fairly and safety and everything. And, you know, maybe a few years ago that would have been the case, but apparently lately that hasn't been the case. And finally, workers in Massachusetts are deciding to stand up and potentially, fingers crossed, could create the first ever Trader Joe's union. So here's wishing them all the best of luck. So we are now in the middle of May and we still got plenty more good stories, including, crucially, we finally figured out, or at least are on the path towards figuring out, what causes SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. I can't even stress how incredibly groundbreaking this is. Researchers pinpoint important biomarker for SIDS. So to briefly summarize a whole bunch of stuff, both from the article and just like the issue with SIDS in general, it's very traumatizing to any parent where suddenly they wake up and like, oh, look, baby's still sleeping. And then they find that the baby has stopped breathing at some point during the night or, during their long nap in the afternoon. That must be absolutely horrifying for a parent to deal with. And of course, there seemed to be no explanation. Hundreds of kids would just die every year and no one could figure out why. Well, turns out finally, after some people, including a researcher who lost her own child and she kind of, wanted to apply her scientific mind and work towards solving this issue, she and others all kind of put their heads together and started testing. Turns out it might have to do with a protein or a chemical in the brain that has to do with stimulating you awake in case there's a disturbance. The Sydney researchers were able to confirm this theory by analyzing dried blood samples taken from newborns who died from SIDS and other unknown causes. They found the activity of the enzyme, not even going to try and pronounce that, was significantly lower in babies who died of SIDS compared to living infants and other non-SIDS infant deaths. BCHE plays a major role in the brain's arousal pathway, explaining why SIDS typically occurs during sleep. So the running theory right now that they have to work with is that it's this chemical, BCHE, that when it's very low, it prevents the brain from kind of waking itself up. So if, it's kind of like how normally if you kind of start snoring or, you start choking on your tongue when you're falling asleep and you go, what? That's your brain being like, oh, wait, hang on, something's kind of wrong here, and kind of makes you go, oh, right? Oh, okay, all right. And then the problem's solved. Apparently, this enzyme means that when babies would start to be in distress, it wasn't there in enough capacity to actually stimulate the brain to wake them up. And so the problem was never resolved. And so they suddenly died. Now, is this, the silver bullet? Not exactly. There's still a lot more research to be done, but it is an incredibly positive step towards identifying what might actually cause SIDS and how to potentially treat it. So again, really amazing news. This could lead to thousands of less dead infants every year, which I think will make a lot of parents feel a lot better, given, unfortunately, until recently, this was a very tragic and mysterious and unknown disease. And now we are finally making progress towards understanding it and solving it. And then, because the good news kept coming in May, Madison Cawthorn lost his re-election primary. Madison Cawthorn loses GOP primary in North Carolina amid series of scandals. So yeah, it all started when Madison Cawthorn apparently dished the dirt on Republican cocaine orgies. And then I guess they thought, oh, nope, the guy's a snitch, we can't trust him. And they just started leaking scandal after scandal from this guy. People were dragging up old, to be fair, rather ridiculous and concerning tweets, and new videos were leaked and photos from different events were leaked, and some of it was valid criticism. Others was just kind of this isn't really something to actually criticize him over. There's plenty to legitimately criticize this scumbag over. Cross-dressing at an event is not really one of them, in my opinion. But in any case, the GOP pretty much had it out for good old Madison here, and he ended up losing his GOP primary. Doesn't mean he lost it to a Democrat, right? It's still just another terrible Republican, but this is one less terrible Trump-backed candidate that's no longer in Congress. So again, I'll take a win where I can get one these days. And while I know we talked about earlier with the UN basically condemning Canada's actions against Indigenous people, and that still stands, and it should serve as a reminder that we have a long way to go when it comes to reconciliation in this country. But some progress is being made in that department. Nasco First Nations, located west of Kesnel, and the BCCOS signed a 5-year enforcement memorandum of understanding. This agreement will promote collaboration and shared stewardship for the natural resources in Nasco First Nations traditional territory. The BCCOS, I'm pretty sure, is the British Columbia Conservation Office Service or something like that. They are basically, if you want to call it, park rangers in that area. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's generally speaking the job, is to be land stewards. Understandably, a lot of people said, hey, maybe we should let the indigenous people who know what they're doing do that for the most part. And in a way, it seems, at least so far, with this one specific instance, it seems to be going ahead for at least 5 years. So again, what happens after the 5 years? Well, we're going to have to wait and see in 5 years, but it's still a positive step forward, which I'm not the only one who feels this way about it. Great to see NASCO First Nation and BCCOS putting reconciliation into action by signing an agreement that will support the protection of natural resources and wildlife according to NASCO customs, traditions, cultural, and spiritual practices. So sure, it doesn't, excuse the terrible actions against land defenders elsewhere in the province, but it is a positive sign that some progress can indeed be made when we actually try and work towards it and don't see things in a purely capitalist interest. So again, mixed bag given the earlier news, but still a positive development that I think more people should know about and also celebrate. And speaking of celebrations, the day after, on May 21st, we got some very good news from Australia. Australia votes for change with election win for Labour Party. Yep, ScoMo no mo. We have a new government in Australia. It is the Labour Party, led by Anthony Albanese, and here's his victory speech, basically.
I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and on behalf of the Australian Labor Party, I commit to the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. Tonight, the Australian people have voted for change. My fellow Australians, it says a lot about our great country that the son of a single mum who was a disability pensioner, who grew up in public housing down the road in Camperdown, can stand before you tonight as Australia's Prime Minister. I want to seek our common purpose and promote unity and optimism, not fear and division. Together, we can end the climate wars. And tomorrow, together, we begin the work of building a better future.
So yeah, it's the Labour Party. It's not like, super far left. It's basically like centrist or center left, but still definitely better than Scott Morrison and the Liberal Party, which again, reminder folks, the Liberal Party in Australia is actually the Conservative Party, and they're very conservative. And they were leading this kind of coalition with also the National Party, which was like an even further right party in Australia. And they seem to have been defeated by Anthony's lovely new Labour government. But, we'll have to wait, obviously, to see if they actually walk the walk rather than simply talking the talk. However, hopefully, again, fingers crossed, this is a positive development, just especially given his victory speech and the priorities for his government and the cheers that it got, and the fact that they also, are now forming government. Here's hoping for better days ahead for Australia. And hey, we're still not even through all of May yet. And I was talking just a little while ago about more unionization efforts around the world, and it's not just at Starbucks. Well, it's now official. Testers at Activision-owned Raven Software have voted to form the US video game industry's first major union. There were 19 votes for and 3 votes against. Raven Software are basically like testers and like a quality assurance group, basically, but there's clearly a movement afoot to unionize more and more places within the video game industry. And that was admittedly in May, and because again, we're now mid-June, I can have some updates to some of these stories. Activision Blizzard to recognize and negotiate with Raven Software QA Union. So the big evil video game company appears, at least so far, to be negotiating in good faith with this company that decided to unionize. Like, genuinely surprised here. So again, folks, it's not just Starbucks that are unionizing, also the video game industry is getting in on this, which is absolutely great to see. Another thing that is great to see is some random yet very positive news out of Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan facility to produce eco-friendly fertilizer made from peas, lentils, and oats. Protein Industries Canada and a group of companies are building a $19 million facility to produce an environmentally friendly fertilizer in Rosetown, Saskatchewan. When completed, the plant will produce up to 6,500 tons per year of micronutrient fertilizer and create 25 jobs, Protein Industries Canada said in a news release. Soilios is billed as a sustainable, non-polluting, climate-positive micronutrient fertilizer made from pea, lentil, and oat hulls created from food processing. Now, people may not know this, but Saskatchewan is basically like one of the main lentil producing regions anywhere in the world. And so this is kind of them finding a way to recycle a product that they have in terms of just boosting sustainability. It lessens the carbon footprint of existing fertilizers, many of which are kind of toxic, let's be real, and also carbon intensive. So this is really good to see, especially in a notoriously conservative province. You have a real independent push by companies and farmers to try and recycle some of what they have for a more sustainable agriculture in the future, while also reducing their emissions and their carbon footprint. This is absolutely a win for sustainability and a sign that when people actually put their minds to it, no matter what government is in charge, we can find solutions to the climate crisis and move forward on them together. And then in other lovely surprising news that happened on May 27th, there was this news out of Spain. Spain's Congress has outlawed catcalling as part of a raft of legislative changes aimed at boosting women's sexual rights. Yeah, as a pleasant surprise, the act of catcalling was outlawed in all of Spain. Spain's Congress has outlawed catcalling as part of a raft of legislative changes aimed at boosting women's sexual rights. The bill also reforms Spain's controversial rape law so that any non-consensual penetration will now count as rape, regardless of whether violence or intimidation was used. So that's some really good positive wins for women, which I think we all could very much use these days. So, you know, that like, hey, if you don't want to be catcalled, go to Spain. It's now illegal there. If someone catcalls you in Spain, like, I don't know, you can prosecute them or something. This is actually really good. Now, of course, the far-right Vox party in Spain has complained about this, saying, you know, oh, why do you hate, you know, beauty and success? Like, oh, what's going on? It's typical terrible far-right bullshit from Spain, unfortunately. But again, this passed. This is good. They can't do anything about it, at least not yet. And again, a positive set of steps for women in Spain. So you absolutely love to see it. The other thing I love to see is people actually working towards buying and creating affordable housing. Montreal nonprofits are buying up apartments to keep rents low. Shapem is a non-profit organization dedicated to creating and managing inclusive and sustainable community housing. With the help of the FDQ Solidarity Fund, Shapem dished out about $2.5 million in December of 2019 to buy the building from the nuns who didn't want to sell to private developers. The plan is to gut the convent, turn it into about 80 units of affordable housing, and turn the large yard into a park for the community and a daycare. So a nonprofit in Montreal talked with people who didn't want to sell. It was a nunnery, basically, or it was going to be, you know, sold at some point. But the nuns didn't want to sell to just some average private developer. They wanted to actually help the poor. So kudos to them, I guess. And this nonprofit managed to step up to the plate, and they, along with others, are trying to buy up units where they can and convert them into affordable housing. Now, also, this touches on something that I know I've mentioned before. I'll see if I can find the video on it, but I think it was only just mentioned in passing, so no guarantee. But Montreal is one of the few cities in Canada where they are actually given, and they actually petitioned the provincial government of Quebec for this, they are given right of first refusal when a building comes up for sale. So they can actually express to someone, hey, we're hoping to, you know, maybe buy this building off you or use this land that's just a, you know, concrete parking lot or something to create units of rental units for affordable housing or something like that. And I think that would be a good idea to have in more cities, so people should look into this at the municipal level. But on top of that, you have nonprofits also trying to just generate more affordable units, because Montreal, like many other cities in Canada, is becoming more and more unaffordable because we're treating real estate like a commodity here for the economy rather than, you know, a thing that people just kind of need to live in and survive. So kudos to Montreal for fighting back against this, but it's still, unfortunately, a drop in the bucket compared to all the other horrific abuses of the real estate market that are happening. But it is so incredibly refreshing to see people meaningfully working towards addressing this, both in terms of people refusing to sell to private developers and also nonprofits doing hard work and spending not insignificant sums of money to buy and create units of affordable housing. And that last story from here in the Great White North was on May 28th, and that finally concludes, in the middle of June, our good news from May video. Again, folks, sorry it was so late. Mea culpa, and it's just been crazy busy IRL, and then also the storm that knocked out power and the internet for just over a week. So yeah, it's been a time and a half lately. But again, I really wanted to make this and get this out there because these are stories from Europe, from Australia, from here in North America, whether they're political or not, that are showing a variety of progressive stories of people actively working towards making the world a better place. There's very clear progress being made. There are people out there fighting the good fight, and as we've seen with more than a dozen or so stories here, people are winning. It is worth fighting for. We have reasons to hope, even when things seem incredibly dire. Progress can still be made even in the darkest of times. And so I want people to hold on to that and hopefully take that as fuel and use it to, renew your internal fiery passion for fighting back against all the terribleness of the world, because as we've seen, it can work. And again, I'm not saying that this is, super rosy. Oh, look, see, everything's actually fine. There's a lot of work to do. But as we can clearly see here, the work is worth doing, and even against incredible odds, we can absolutely win against the terrible powers at play. So I hope people enjoyed this, and if there were any other good news stories that you didn't see me cover, feel free to comment down below. But I just really want to stress again that these are positive things that have happened, even again, just over the course of 1 month. Over the month of May, all these good things happened, and we moved towards a better, more progressive future. And I wish more people recognize that there are these good stories out there and that we can, in fact, win. But unfortunately, they don't often get circulated in the algorithm, and that means less people see them. And if you can't tell, that's what's bothering me today.